Hello, everybody. So it's really nice to be here, and thank you very much for inviting me. I'm going to start by speaking from a conversation that Juliet and I had together, which was the inspiration for this talk. And it's the starting place, really, for the talk. Now, what I have cleared with Juliet that it's okay that I mention this and thank her for the inspiration. So the conversation included this moment where she said there are many things about home educating that can't be spoken about. And this was in the context of my offer for a talk to discuss the more existential aspects of home education. And I have a background in researching silence and alternative education, and you could say in particular home education. So altogether, this comment from Juliet, which is, well, there are these things that are gains that you can't quantify with words, was very interesting to me. And if we put this in the context of home education research in general, there's been a lot of interest, which we could call coloured by a schooling agenda, to prove home education works. So this is a what works agenda, which comes entirely from a school paradigm. Or that it's beneficial, as in not harmful. That's the fear agenda. You know, is home education abusive? Answer no, it's education. But all of these kinds of questions have resulted in a type of research community and context. And we're talking a lot of papers. The Kunzman and Gaither paper from 2013 that I published in the journal I edit, called Other Education, othereducation.org, listed many papers, and they culled from, you know, an awful lot, a number, and I don't know what the number was in 2013, but it was less than the updated version, which I'm editing right now and will come out soon in Other Education. And there they list 497, I think it was, quality research papers on home education, most of which are qualitative, meaning that they are anecdotal. But there's been a rise in the past few years of the quantitative type because of a need to position home education as valuable as schooling, so that it can justify, validate home education practice, but also protect home educators from the state interventions which don't understand home education as an educational paradigm. I'm speaking very fast, so I do apologize for any international and second language English speakers. I will try to slow down a bit on account of comprehension for all. So what we're looking at in this talk is a gap in the market, the research arena, something that hasn't yet had the time or the space to focus on, because everyone has been so busy trying to protect and prove and investigate, frankly, home education, but always from this sort of, is it as good as school base? It's very clear from the research that we have. I'm in Tuscany, there's a lot of insects, so if I dodge a bee or something, it's so if we look at the research base, what we see is that it is as good as schooling. It's different, but there's nothing wrong with it. Now, obviously, this all depends on many factors, but then all education depends on many factors. And I won't rehearse here because it's neither the time nor the place. We're looking at something different and new, hopefully. I won't rehearse here what those necessary factors are for a successful home education, because apart from anything else, it's all contextual, it's all relative. It just depends on so many things which are unique to families, including their national setting. What we're looking at here are, as Juliet was talking about, these unspoken gains. And this is something that I have found fascinating for over a decade. You know, I did my PhD on what happens to the self of adults when they discover that education outside of schools, without schools, in particular home education, is a possibility? And the answer in a nutshell is they have their mind blown. So why do they have their mind blown by the possibility that children don't have to go to school? Well, the reasons are manifold, but they are to do with very exciting and interesting aspects of who we are as people in the world. They're to do with freedom and what it means to live in and with freedom, and in a family setting, in an educational setting, using education, because education is incredibly exciting. As you know, if you're home educating, you are either in the process of discovering this, or you already found it out and you're thrilled to have found it out, that education itself, independent of variables, is a fabulous thing. And when people discover that they can engage with education, educating themselves, seeing their children becoming educated, being a part of that becoming educated, helping it, influencing it, evolving themselves with it, but also all of this, and I'm speaking particularly here, okay, thank you very much, Joanna. So I'm just looking at that comment. And just after this little sort of intro, if you like, I'm going to try and make it as little as possible. I would like to go to you all, and I'm going to ask you some questions, and let's see what you come up with, because you have a lot of knowledge that hasn't yet been tapped. You have a lot of experience that hasn't yet been tapped. So adults in particular, and those are the people that I spoke to. I didn't particularly speak to the children, although the adults were telling me about the children, and I spoke to one or two of the older children. And you can see it also in literature or children's testimonies where they are talking about this. And it's all roughly the same, which is that the ability to be free, as in without state oversight, without state pressures, without demands of the state, which are so well channeled and organized through the discourses of schooling. Have you done the homework yet? It's due in by tomorrow. Come on, get on with it, that kind of thing. That freedom to be away from that stuff allows a person to be in charge of themselves, in touch with themselves, and therefore more at peace, generally speaking, with the idea that they are a person in the world, because they're just not so bothered, they're not so hassled, and therefore they are in a space of time, location, energy, interrelationships with others, where they can explore. And this ability to be free to explore is something which is unique to home education. Now here we're experiencing a world that has suddenly come upon this freedom to a small or large extent on account of the COVID virus. And that's a very interesting situation that we couldn't have predicted. But when I was looking at the discovery of education without schools, this was with just interviews with about 30 people, and then talking to people on the street. So, interactions with about 100 people. And in general, the sense of the whole, the sense I was getting from everybody was, wow, does freedom exist? Oh, I'd like to know about that. I didn't know it existed. Or people who'd already been in it because they'd been home educating for a while and were saying, yeah, I found it and it's incredible and I didn't know it was there. Now, the question would be, what? We as people are born into the world, and it takes something like the discovery of home education to discover that we can be free. And that's very curious. So in the silent spaces of home education are things like this: the discovery of freedom, the free self, the free imagination, the freedom to explore, the freedom to be on your own terms without undue pressure from social influences or social demands. It's extraordinary, in my opinion, the impact that a taste of this freedom can have on people. I mean, when I was talking to them they were talking about seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. And there was a lot of religious discourse, which was part of a symptom of the fact that home education as an experience is yet to develop its own discourse. I just want to warn you that there's someone has just arrived at the house. I'm going to try and ignore them as best I can, but you might see them pass by at the back of me. Anyway, so the discourse of home education is in development. What we have is we have borrowing from the schooling discourse, and then people are slowly, I mean, you know, home educators can do this quite well because they've got the freedom and they've got the imagination, and they've also got the community to develop their own discourse, their own communities of discourse, and of the ways that they speak together and the conversation they have. Did you know this? Have you experienced that? Hi, how are you? And so on and so forth. What have you found out about home education over the course of your years of doing it? Chat, chat, chat. And these words, these phrases, these expressions and communications of this reality, or I would almost call it the new reality or the alternative reality, the one that most people don't get a taste of because they're sending their kids to school. But of course, now in the COVID crisis, we've got a lot more people getting a taste of it. And out of these conversations of the new reality, the other reality, come phrases and words and concepts which are in the process of developing through those chats and those discussions. And what we need more and more for home education, on the basis of protection, on the basis of validation, but more on the basis of enjoying it and appreciating it for what it gives, is a new set of phrases. Now here, and I'll just give you a quick run through and then we'll go to you guys, if that's okay with you. Here, what I've written down is a few things, and these are just to sort of whet your appetite for your own contributions. So we've got the need for words and concepts, and I've already mentioned this idea of a freedom gate that we walk through, and in my PhD I called it the gateless gate, because it's not a gate in one place and we all walk through it like we're in a line. It's a gate which is undefined and diverse, so diverse it's no gate at all, but nevertheless there's a gate to walk through into this freedom. And the questions there are, how do we access it? Well, we deregister children, or we make that decision or choice to not send them to school, and then when we get to this new land, or this new reality as I'm calling it, in my research I've called it a new paradigm, there are goods, there are treasures, it seems to me. One of them is that we can be in touch with intuition, our own. We can link our intuition to other people's. What is intuition? That's not a question that I'm about to answer in this session. We can, and I think this is very important because in particular my own recent experience as a parent who is home educating for the first time with my child. He chooses to go to school. So this is my first chance to be a home educating parent. And what I'm discovering, which was impossible for me to appreciate without being in the home education as a practitioner, was the need for children to have therapeutic interventions from their parents, from people who love them. And what I mean by therapeutic interventions is, if a child is scared of learning for whatever reason, or a particular type of learning, say for instance they've developed a fear for maths, what home education allows as a space is that the parents can prioritize the need to talk to the children first and foremost about their emotions, rather than focus on academic gain. And this takes time, this takes freedom to do it. So home education, in terms of is about the becoming of a person who's therapeutically, emotionally secure, because they've had the ability in respect of the time and space that they have access to in a home education scenario, to be in touch with their caregivers, their loving caregivers, in such a way that therapeutic transactions can occur instead of the force and the pressure of demands for academic ability and gain. They're now in this time frame, and that links us to another thing, which is a relationship to time. There is a flexibility in home education, and so be it therapeutic gains or academic gains, these can happen with a pace that is suited to a particular child. But also, I must add, and I'd like to stress this, parents need to be comfortable in home education. So there is this this chance for the family to do the dance of home education. And just as I mentioned that, I myself am making up a phrase, you know, because I'm trying to articulate what do I mean about, I'm calling it the dance. And I mean a sort of a waltz where you're in tune, there's intuition, there's time, there's space, there's love, there's care. And this is all about the rhythm of the day, and how you can plug into what we could call is a natural rhythm rather than a forced timetable rhythm that you get with the schools. So just very briefly, the other things are silence, solitude, the ability to be bored and for it to be okay. Boredom can be extremely useful, beneficial. And apart from anything else, there's the insights into learning that can come from the space and time and lack of pressure, which are about reflecting on what learning is and how people learn. And I cannot see myself, and this is in the context of being a teacher, a school trained, but you know, being a teacher, but then a university teacher, so let's just say generally a teacher, I cannot see how reflecting on education, pedagogy, ways to learn is not a good thing. But in schools, they already have their reflection done and dusted, and it's all pre-planned by someone who the teacher probably has never even met. Now, the teacher can use their creativity to influence how the pedagogy occurs in the classroom. But for instance, in English schools, they had a three-part lesson plan. So you got the introduction, you got the content, and you got the plenary. Well, that's a form of pedagogy that's given to the teacher, in fact, demanded of the teacher, otherwise they are deemed to not be doing their job properly. But in home education, how children learn, how you run your classroom, and I mean the classroom of life, of the world, of your house, of the locality, is a pedagogy which is entirely up to you and your kids. So that is a massive gain, because pedagogy is at the heart of education functioning in the best possible way for an individual. So enough of me talking about this. Let's, if we could, go to your experiences. And what I'm interested in is, what do you find, or what do you feel? Can you articulate what it is about home education which is valuable, but you feel has never been validated? So let me see if I go to chat.
So we're asking people to raise their hands for this one. I disabled chat while you're talking so it wouldn't distract you, Helen.
Okay.
So do you want people to raise their hands if they want to say something?
Yeah, they can put something in the chat and I can read it, or they can raise their hands and if you pull them through. Thank you, Marty. So that was, I'm just reading through some chats. What else don't I have to do?
Okay, so say the question again, please.
Right, it's what I'm really interested to know from all of you is, in your experience, however long or short your experience is, you will already, even if you're a COVID home educator, you will already have had a taste of the things that I've been talking about. What of those things have you experienced, but you've not found a context with words to say? Say, for instance, you're on the phone to your mum or your best friend or your brother or sister or something, saying, hey, we're home educating. And they say, oh yeah, what's it like? And there's something that you want to say to them, but you don't know how to express it. Is there a way for you to just use any words that come to mind and to share with us? So Joanna says the bond between parents, let me see how I get to that. So The bond between parent and child alters when you home educate. Fostering wonder, Holly says. Doyen, forgive me if I've said your name right, Doyen, the need to raise the total child. So these are big deals. The parent is sacredly able to educate. So linking into the spiritual side of home education, which of course is extremely difficult to articulate. Our family is really close. The 5 children range from 22 to 8, but absolutely love to spend time together. You see, this is not something that is quantifiable. So you say, well, we love to spend time together. And then how do you put that in any context other than that phrase, which is meaningful seemingly only to the family itself? We know we love to spend time together, but how do we make that a communication which is about education, which is an educational comment? So let me just, right, my phone. Okay, so let's have a look. I think it gives the family a chance to develop their own culture and identity. Yes, and uniquely so. I mean, every single family has got their own way of interacting. And some of those things will be, really successful forms of interaction that other families would love to copy. And other things won't be successful forms of interaction that other families wouldn't want to copy, but nevertheless, when they come together, they can be worked on in a home education context because there is this therapeutic holding of everybody without the rush to the school gate in the morning, the coming back knackered, and so on and so forth. So the way in which energy flows is allowing families to be a different kind of family. And here, a lot of you are talking about the value of being with the other person being your family member / members. And this is not something that people tend to talk about in our societies that much, for the simple reason that we're all a bit shy about talking about our emotional inner life. Well, I would make the claim, and hear your comments, learning is a lifelong journey, being free to choose. Learning and education takes on a different meaning. Let's keep going. A holistic education, the ability to be the primary person or people who gets to speak over and into the child's sense of self. I don't have anything to compare to as we've always home educated. It just feels natural to me. I do think the family identity is stronger than it might be so family identity, if the children were more separated out in school. We talk about everything. The points you pass on the journey that are milestones, but not covering curriculum or passing exams and tests. So I would say, I resonate with what you've said so far. I would say the ease, the at-easeness, the feeling of plentiful time and focusing on joy rather than toil. That thing about joy is very exciting, I think, for home educators, because in my PhD research, what I discovered was, and I made mention of it in this very context, that the joy of home education is a shocking and surprising factor or fact or outcome of home educating. Why is it so joyful? I think that this is part of the lack of pressure, the lack of stress, the ability to be with, as you're all saying. Slowing down and building on the relationship is from Gina. Opportunity to, I think that's discipline behavior more effectively, small children. But I'm sure that what you mean by that is because you have a close relationship, one which is located in a context of the family and of love, that your children are more attached, and therefore the ability to say, nope, you can't do that, or that's not exactly what we want in our family. It just works more without the need to be punitive. Our definition of success is very different from other families. Exactly. So you can be yourselves, and you can determine what you feel is success on your own terms. My youngest is 20 months old, and my older two have developed a wonderful bond, which if they were at school, they wouldn't have. Yes, so the bond between people, the ease of cross-generational communication with respect. Children raised more rooted in who they are because the home and community culture is reflected much more. I mean, let's just pause for a minute on the nature of the things that are coming through here. You're not saying, oh my gosh, it's awful. Now, this is in a context of home education, research which has had its own problems in the past, still ongoing. You know, this will always be a problem that home education research discourse has, which comes from this factor of joy. It's almost like we can't believe that it's that good, or that there are these treasures, these benefits that other people just don't get a chance to experience in such a rich way. So therefore we must doubt it, we must question and say, oh, you know what, it can't be that good. There must be something going on. There must be a bit of a dodginess around this, because, you know, protesteth too much and all that kind of thing. Well, actually, no, not really. One of the biggest problems of home education may be, and this is a question for us all to consider, it may be that we just cannot believe our luck. We cannot believe that life can be that good, or that education can be that awesome. And that also itself is in a context of home education is not easy. And my research participants, when I spoke to them for the PhD, were very clear. One quote is it's not a bed of roses. And I would say, yeah, no, it isn't. I mean, you're dealing with education, a big power in and of itself, in a context of lack of support from the wider world. But the power of the person seems to be so significant as accessed by the home education context that it can overcome the various difficulties of the home educating reality, context, political, social, and otherwise. And in terms of the educational messages or reality, the news is good, which is that education works, doesn't need a school, doesn't need a teacher. People are self-motivated if they're not significantly damaged by having had their motivation damaged, and that's often caused by schooling. So, you know, people are natural learners, which you'll, if you link into, say, Peter Gray's talk and so on, he talks about that. And the research on learning to read, and how children don't need to be taught didactically. They don't need to have a power over them as they seek to learn. They have their own power within them, and so the job of the home educating setting is more to allow power to be, without power being artificial and unequal. So let's have a look at your. So our children are all independent thinkers and non-conformists. This is a kind of good thing, except for when you want them to agree with you. Able to be led by our kids' interests and stop when it's clear they've had enough. Yes, they would not understand the rhythm waltz that occurs where life and growth happens. How do we answer the how do you gauge that children are learning? Basically, the parental role is undetermined. That's a big area. And I would say that the answer to that, if that is a question, the answer to that is quite simply in one of those silenter spaces. We could talk out of that silent space, and we can say, well, the answer to adjudicating and judging quantity and quality of learning is, in a home education context, affected by issues to do with time and individuality. So we cannot apply the same paradigm of judgment that the schools use, which is by, say, year 4, you need to have learned this much and you need to be at this stage. Because individuals learn at different paces. So it's more about trust. I mean, trust is a huge concept in the home education setting. And trust is also one of those concepts which is difficult to articulate, but I don't want to make a joke by saying, come on, let's just trust that trust works. That would be ridiculous. We need to explore these things and discuss them. I mean, when I'm researching silence, one of the curious things about silence is you can only really appreciate silence properly if you talk about it. So it'd be the same with trust. We don't need to trust. We need to understand why it matters and how it functions and what it brings to us. And all of that occurs through discussing it. And so home educators are therefore called in this sense to be really and truly philosophers of education, philosophers of their own families. You have the time and the space to reflect. You've got the setting where you can sit down around a table and talk with each other. And so therefore, it's not that I'm saying, oh, it's a good thing to do, go and do it. I'm just saying you're in a context of, you know, one of the most interesting contexts that the world can offer. You've got a family plus education plus freedom. Well, there's a lot of interesting things to discuss in that try something, triumphant, triangle, you know, whatever, three thing. The freedom, the family, and education. It's like these combinational things where you know how you've got a lock, and if you've got 5 numbers, it's way more complicated than if you've got 3 numbers. Well, 3's enough. I mean, that's going to last you a lifetime. How do you possibly answer that combination of things in a context of living? You can't. So home education thereby becomes a source of the most incredible conversations, never ending discovery, and with that discovery comes joy. So the fact that we all share the responsibility for our own educations and lifestyle is on us and the children. There's no one we have to defer to or can blame. I mean, that's massive in the sense of and this also came through with other home educators that I've spoken to in the past, and for the doctorate, which is that they're saying, whoa, this is really scary, actually, you know, we're in charge. There's a lot of philosophy out there about fear of freedom. People prefer to be led, and they prefer to be treated like robots. I mean, there's, you know, in the world to come, we really have to get a grip on what it means to live in a world with robots. And this isn't out of the blue. This is a big issue. And if you ask me, home educators are a community who ought to be leading the world to come in respect of saying, we know what it is to be a person, brackets, rather than a robot. We know what it means to be free, and we know what it means to have responsibility. And this is not to do with computational intelligence. This is to do with something ineffable, spiritual, perhaps, if you are inclined that way. And in this conference, you may well be. But it's to do with this complexity of humanness that with our 3 of freedom, education, and the family just gets even more complex if we add existential questions of personhood, selfhood, being and becoming, and meaning. So these things are, home educators, if you ask me, in the world are a community who have a collective expertise that can it be beaten by any other community? I don't know. I mean, if you know of a community that has got a collective expertise of what it means to be and become as a human being in a context of freedom and education, let me know. But I can't think of a different you know, a community that's got a higher level of awareness and a higher level of development of understanding. And so for the world to come, particularly, if you don't mind me saying, post-COVID, if we ever get there, COVID, in COVID, post-COVID, whatever, pre-robot, and so on and so forth, because the rise of technology is not a joke, then home educators could step up and lead discussions and resist as well. I mean, I think your power to resist is substantial. So going back to Juliet and her comment right at the start, which was the inspiration for discussion of these untold gains. If your children are saying to you in any way, shape or form, I don't have what school children have, you can say, oh yeah, but you have things that they can never dream of having, because your paradigm, the paradigm of home education, and of children's growth within it, let me just go for that, is completely different and completely fitted, completely desirable if we are to resist spiritually, personally, socially, politically, and every other thing, a rise of the dehumanization of the human species. So let's have a look what else here we got. The intimacy, having time to think, to know oneself, to know one's interests and passions. Can I just check in with you? Can you hear me okay? Juliet, is everybody okay? Am I chit-chatting? And when would you like me to stop?
You have about 5 more minutes.
Okay, so are there any questions? Well, no, we do the questions after, perhaps.
Look, I mean, if you wanted to take questions, they would just need to, I'm not sure if they can unmute themselves individually. Somebody do a test unmute for me, please. That's not a
Yes, I can hear you.
Hello.
Okay, great. So I think if you mute yourself to ask a question and then unmute yourself to ask a question, then mute yourself after, just to avoid distracting background noise. We will need to end the session in about 5-ish minutes, and Helen is around on the app if anyone wants to chat to her
So is
anytime.
Does anybody have want to unmute themselves to ask a question which they think would be a good one for the 5 minutes?
It's very quiet.
It's all right. I'm looking at this. There's no what.
Anyone want to ask anything of Helen?
Video stopped. What we well,
perhaps you want to sum up then, Helen, and they can come and find you. You can always set up a group chat as well.
Joy has posted a question. Let's see if I can find that.
How do you deal with the community of church where majority go to school?
Okay.
How do you deal with the community at church? I think what she means is sometimes where your child is home educated and
yeah, that's a great one. Let's go with that, because being different when you're in a majority context, I suppose it sort of sums up the inner message of this session, which is that there is a tremendous amount of value in home education which is not available to offer in response to the majority view. So in a context where you are, say for instance in a church where you home educate but the others send their children to school, because of this hidden treasure, this as yet unspoken about in easily accessible language terms treasure, you can, I'm telling you that it's there. The research is enough in collage for us to be clear that you can be confident that you're following a path which is valid and valuable. So your path is different from theirs, and of course, and this is a struggle that I've had, because I'm very interested in home education and I'm very positive about it. On the whole, I'm aware of the difficulties and the downsides, if you like, but I'm pretty sure that I'm never going to change my mind about its positive aspects. I just know too much about its positivity as education, and so what the positive benefits of home education are to be celebrated and enjoyed. And so in a church context, we can respect those that send to school. As I said, my son goes to school, and I have to find a space and a place within my own educational self to respect school attendance and respect teachers and people who make that choice. But at the same time, I can be clear that this is not my philosophical path. It's not my educational choice of path. And so respect for them, but also respect for oneself and one's own choices, which we make knowingly and we make with the clarity that we've made a good choice. It's as simple as that. Does that answer the question? Okay. It's just confidence, right? The message is we can be confident. There are brilliant things about home education. And if there's ever questions, they're okay. If there are ever doubts, they're okay. The brain is plastic. You know, gaining a la schooling doesn't have to happen here and now. Is someone trying to speak? No, I'm not hearing. Well, it's the things that we are yet to articulate about home education are already known. We await more and more language with which we can express these treasures, riches, and it's our job as home educators to create our own language around these benefits so that we can enjoy them, feel joy about them, not necessarily preach about them, but certainly feel confident and secure in a world which is, for the majority, locked into a schooling paradigm. So I think that's my talk finished. Thank you so much for coming, and I will hang around for the questions and answers.
Hi there, Helen. I'm just busy on dealing with a query at the same time, which is the interesting thing of this. So Helen, thank you so much. If anyone wants to quickly stick around and ask Helen anything, go ahead. But other than that, the session is finished. Okay, so Helen, when you want to leave, you can end. Kat is the host, so Kat can end the meeting anytime. Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much.